The presidential primary and a lawyer shortage ahead on Face the State. The process to pick the next president comes to Ohio in just over a month. But you can cast your ballot starting this week for that race and many others. What you need to know to make sure your vote counts for the presidential primary. Plus, a lawyer shortage in rural Ohio. It's a real thing and it's a big problem. Today, Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, Sharon Kennedy, on just how big of a problem it is, how it could affect you, and what the state is doing about it. Now on Face the State. Good morning and thanks for joining us for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. We start today with a focus on the presidential primary as voters get ready to start casting their ballots. It's a big year in politics. Voters will pick a new president in November, but first it's time to pick the nominees. The Ohio primary is Tuesday, March 19th. The race for the Republican presidential nomination is down to two, with former President Trump facing off against former South Carolina Governor and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. However, 5 candidates in all will still appear on the primary ballot. President Joe Biden has one challenger on the Ohio primary ballot, Congressman Dean Phillips of Minnesota. Voters will also be selecting party nominees for U.S. Senator, U.S. Representative, state representatives and senators, justices, judges, and local races. Here are the important dates leading up to the presidential primary election. This Tuesday, February 20th, is the deadline to register to vote. Early in-person voting begins the very next day. March 12th is the last day to request an absentee ballot to receive in the mail. If you're mailing your ballot back through the U.S. mail, it has to be postmarked by March 18th and received by boards of elections by March 23rd. And March 19th, of course, again, is the presidential primary election. Polls will be open from 6:30 in the morning to 7:30 in the evening. One other note, absentee ballots returned in person or by a method other than U.S. mail have to be received by boards of elections by the time the polls close. You can go to voteohio.gov to register, to request an absentee ballot, and to get voting information. And in order to vote, you'll need one of the following IDs: an Ohio driver's license, state of Ohio ID card, a U.S. passport, U.S. military ID card, or a U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs ID card. Joining me now to help us prepare for the presidential primary is Aaron Sellers. He is the Public Information Officer for the Franklin County Board of Elections. Aaron, thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for the invite.
Well, it is still early, but what are you seeing in terms of interest in this election?
As of today, we've had about 5,000 folks that have requested an absentee ballot by mail. That's probably down from other presidential primary cycles because of just the number of candidates that people have to vote on. So that's kind of where we stand today.
Hey, I was going to ask about that because now, typically at this time, you still see a rather robust field of candidates. And, in the Republican race, it's down to Trump and Haley. President Biden, he won the last primary by 96%. So is that you are seeing kind of an impact of that?
Yeah, like I said, it's because the lack of candidates that are out there that sometimes that will affect voter turnout. But there's certainly other races down ticket that are important for
the U.S. Senator race, the prosecutor's race in Franklin County. What else is drawing attention?
There's judgeship races. Obviously this is a partisan primary. So it's different than a general election in the sense that when you go to your polls on the 19th, they'll ask you what race you want to participate in, and that would either be the Republican primary, the Democrat primary, or an issues-only ballot.
How have the recent presidential elections played out in terms of turnout? I know there was a COVID effect in 2020.
Yeah. 2020 is kind of an anomaly in a sense that turnout was almost 20%, which is pretty low for a presidential primary cycle. But obviously COVID played a crucial role in that. We did get done with the early voting cycle, but it was the next day where the election got postponed. Going back to 2016, we had about a 41% turnout. As we've talked, the general election in 2020, we had a 72% turnout. So you can certainly see the difference in turnout models.
Yeah, definitely as the general election appears. So Basically, what do you want people to know about what they'll encounter when they come to the Board of Elections to vote, if they're going to go there to vote early?
Yeah, so if voters, which that certainly begins on Tuesday, or Wednesday, my apologies.
Yeah.
Wednesday, early voting starts across the state. There will be 162 hours of early voting, not only here in Franklin County, but across the state. So there's ample time for folks to come out and vote absentee in person. What we encourage voters to do is bring an ID, a state ID, driver's license, unexpired. They can bring a passport or a federal military ID, and that would suffice for ID requirements.
Yeah, and that big first deadline we're talking about too, as you mentioned, Tuesday is the deadline to register. So if someone still hasn't registered, what do they need to do?
So it's very important. Obviously, if somebody is new to the state, has moved recently, name change, all those things are important, and we hope that they would update those before the close of registration deadline, which is Monday. We will be in the office from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m., and those hours are uniform across the state as well, as we discussed. But it's crucial that voters register by that date to be able to participate in the primary. Another important factor is a name change or a change of address. Voters vote where they live, and that's very important for people to understand. If they don't have that information, if we don't have the most up-to-date information from them, they would have to cast a provisional ballot, which those are counted, but those are counted on the back end.
Okay.
So if you don't want to vote a provisional ballot and you've moved recently or you've had a name change, you need to update that with us by Monday.
We talked about this being a partisan primary, but how bipartisan is the process?
Yeah. So as I say, whether we're in a presidential primary cycle or an off-year election, all the things that we do at the board, we do the same thing every election cycle. The way Ohio does elections is impressive, and I think hopefully other states would do some of the things that we do in the sense that everything is bipartisan. There's not one thing that happens at the Board of Elections that doesn't happen without a Republican and a Democrat in the room. Right now, as we speak, we've got bipartisan teams that are doing logic and accuracy testing on all the machines that will be used on the 19th. So it's very important for viewers out there to know what's going on at the board and how bipartisan it is.
So someone's watching out for the voters, basically,
100%.
at each location.
100%.
Is there anything new voters need to know going into this primary election in terms of the process of voting or what they'll encounter when they get there?
No, the voter ID requirements have been in place for a couple of election cycles. So in that respect, no. Voters in Franklin County will notice our touchpad electronic poll books that are back in locations. There's a couple cycles that we had traditional paper poll books, so voters won't have to wait in line depending on how their last name ends. So processing should be much faster at all of our 304 locations on Election Day.
And I want to emphasize the voter ID requirements. We do have the graphic that we can show up with the list of those again, because if someone shows up without that, then they're not going to be able to vote that day, or as you said, maybe a provisional.
Yeah,
vote.
so certainly we won't turn anybody away from casting a ballot. But if they do not have an ID with them, they would certainly have to vote a provisional ballot and then come in and remedy that with us.
Now, I understand also that what can make this kind of interesting too is that 2/3 of voters, and I can't remember if you were saying Franklin County or across the state, are actually unaffiliated.
Certainly in Franklin County, but I think that mirrors across the state because we are every 2 years, voters have the opportunity to pick the party in which they want to participate in. And then after that date, that's how folks are either registered as a Republican or a Democrat or unaffiliated. And as I told you, roughly about 2/3 of voters here in Franklin County are unaffiliated. Now, that certainly doesn't mean that they are middle of the road.
Yeah.
They may have views on one side or the other, but they're just not registered with a party.
Okay, so just to be clear too, though, if someone goes, they say they want to vote Republican, so they get the Republican primary ballot. So that means for the next 2-year cycle, they would be a registered
They would
Republican?
be registered as a Republican. The same thing on the Democrat side, or a no issues. They would be unaffiliated. So those are the two major parties in Ohio: Republican, Democrat, and then unaffiliated.
Okay, and so that people could also get just an issues ballot.
Correct. and that would certainly make them unaffiliated.
Okay.
But they wouldn't be able to participate in president or any primary race down the ticket. It would just be on tax levies, school levies, anything that deals with tax dollars.
Yeah. And finally, just briefly, Aaron, what kinds of things can people find if they go to voteohio.gov?
So on voteohio.gov, what voters can do is they can certainly update their registration with a name change, a new location if they are a registered voter. Voters who have gone through the process and have a driver's license in Ohio could also register for a first time through that site because we have their wet signature from the BMV. If they haven't done that, then they would need to come into a board and file a paper ballot to register.
Good information today, Aaron. Thanks for helping us get ready for the upcoming presidential primary. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Doug.
All right. Well, and here's another look at the important dates leading up to the presidential primary. The two big ones this week are Tuesday. It's the deadline to register to vote, and early in-person voting begins Wednesday. Again, you can go to voteohio.gov for more information. Still ahead on Face the State. You hope you never need a lawyer, but when you do, will there be one to help you? That may depend on where you live in Ohio. Next, the lawyer shortage and the incentive program aiming to fill the need. Welcome back to Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. You've probably heard the jokes that there are too many lawyers. The problem is there aren't enough of them in Ohio, at least not in the 82 counties outside of our major metropolitan areas. This map shows the scope of the situation. According to the Ohio Access to Justice Foundation, 58% of Ohioans have too few attorneys to meet their legal needs. Nearly 3/4 of Ohio's attorneys are practicing in those 6 metropolitan counties shaded in white. So the burden falls heaviest on our rural areas. That's why Ohio started the Rural Practice Incentive Program. The goal is to get more young lawyers to go into smaller cities and towns, maybe their hometowns, to practice for 3 to 5 years. In exchange for the commitment, they'll get $10,000 per year toward their student loans. If you are in your last year of law school or have fewer than 8 years in practice and you're interested, you have to apply by March 15th. You can get more information in the featured links at 10tv.com. Earlier this week, I talked with Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Ohio, Sharon Kennedy, about the problems created by the lawyer shortage and how the Rural Practice Incentive Program aims to fix them. Well, Your Honor, first of all, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Can you give us an idea of just how big or bad the lawyer shortage is in Ohio?
Well, right now we're looking at significant legal deserts. When you look at Ohio's 88 counties, only 6 of the largest metropolitan areas have a sufficient number of lawyers. So the Ohio Access to Justice really did the calculus on how bad the shortage is. They look at 1 lawyer for every 700 persons or citizens, and that is a right number. So they project that 82 of our 88 counties are underserved. An example would be Vinton County. There's only 2 lawyers, according to the Access to Justice Foundation, with more than a $12,000 resident. That's more than 6,000 citizens for each attorney. But that statistic bears out across Ohio everywhere. So these legal deserts is really what the General Assembly was trying to fix when they introduced legislation, House Bill 150. It became effective January 2nd of 2023. And then the Ohio Department of Higher Education, they were given the onerous task of writing the rules of what are we going to do to help those lawyers, newly licensed 8 years or less, to have a loan repayment plan to try to get them into the rural areas.
And we'll get more into that in just a second. But when you're talking about these legal deserts, what kinds of problems does that lead to for the courts and for the people needing representation? Is it just in terms of a delay or bad representation? No representation?
No representation, and I think that's what the General Assembly was trying to attack first. If you are charged with a crime as an adult or a delinquent act as a juvenile, you're entitled to representation if you're indigent, and they're unable to find lawyers. So House Bill 150 is really targeting if you're willing to work 520 hours in an underserved area as a public defender, a prosecutor or a court-appointed attorney in the criminal justice system. That, to me, is where Ohio Access to Justice Foundation, that's their first step. They would like to see the General Assembly then grow that program in the years to come to include access to justice for civil litigation. If you're facing an eviction, if you're facing benefits that are going to be denied, having a lawyer to help fight that issue.
Are there particular areas of the law that seem to be greater affected by the shortage, whether that is, criminal justice or family services or juvenile justice?
I think the primary onerous problem is the criminal justice system. You're entitled to representation if you're unable to afford counsel to protect your constitutional rights, to ensure that all of the due process rights afforded to you are provided to you, and clearly adequate representation is one of those. But I also think about all of those other things that you just talked about. There are other areas of law that really require a lawyer to handle that case. So when I was first an attorney, I was on the court-appointed list, so I represented a number of families that were going through custody matters in juvenile court when faced with the state of taking their children, and they had a right to counsel as well. So it's all of those areas that I think are harmed as a result.
We often hear, across the country that, public defenders are overworked, too heavy of a caseload perhaps, pay isn't great compared to private practice. Is that part of the issue here too, is that, the allure of being a public defender is maybe not there?
I think it's a multifaceted problem. Number one, I think you have a declining number of young people who are going to law school to become a lawyer. You also then are up against when you have that debt and you have to repay that debt, and you're looking at where am I going to make sufficient monies to care for myself, my family, and then pay off that debt. That I think that's part of that answer, is that the financial drawl is not there to do that. But that's why I think the General Assembly, taking a page from the past, might be onto something. So
that's, in result, then the state has the Rural Practice Incentive Program, and you've talked a little bit about it through the Ohio Department of Higher Education. So how does the incentive work for those who might be interested in it? So the General Assembly set aside $1.5 million and then left to the Higher Department of Education the duty to create the rules. So those came out in January. The window is open until March 15th. So the rules are, if you are a lawyer with fewer than 8 years of licensure and you have a student debt, if you're willing to provide 520 hours of service in an underserved area, they will pay $10,000 of your student loan debt. The original contracts are for 3 years, but they are allowing extensions into a 4th and 5th year, so it's possible the maximum would be a $50,000 down payment or repayment on your student loan. So it is the $10,000 per year of commitment. It is. But it is a commitment, as you mentioned. It's 3 to 5 years. You're signing a contract with the Ohio Department of Education that you're going to provide 520 hours in an underserved area, and then they will pay that student loan off. There is a parameter where you cannot be part of another government loan repayment program. That seems to be one of the other barriers that they have. You've talked about who's eligible, but how would they apply? So the Ohio Department of Higher Education has a website. It's highered.ohio.gov/rural-practice, and then you can fill out an application. So anyone who's a lawyer with fewer than 8 years of practice, or if you know a young lawyer who is within that parameter, inspire them to want to serve in an underserved area of Ohio. Yeah, and I believe that information is also right on the homepage for the Ohio Supreme Court as well, to easily to click on that. I want to talk a little bit about you, in the time we have left. You've been Chief Justice now for just over a year, going into your second year. How do you approach the role of being chief?
I think everyone comes to the job with certain initiatives that they want to foster. Some of that comes about by hearing the stories of Ohioans as you're on the campaign trail. Some of those early initiatives that I had, increasing transparency in the court, helping people find a pathway to learn more about what local judges do. So the court voted on, and there is now accessible a case inquiry form. So if you're a party or a lawyer in a county and you don't know what the status of your case is, you can fill that out. So many people wanted to access the time guideline worksheets for judges without having to make a public records request. Those are now live for the duration of time that that judge has been on the bench. Clearly, as a former law enforcement officer, that reentry piece for living the life restored is critical for me. So we did the reentry task force in June with a final task force report coming out.
Yeah, you mentioned you were a police officer in Hamilton, I believe. And so what do you mean for our viewers and for myself too by the reentry aspect of it?
So as a young police officer, I encountered a young man who committed another crime just so he could go back to prison. This is at a time in the mid-'80s where you don't have services for those who are attempting to live the life restored. They've paid their debt to society. He was timed out, but he didn't have anywhere to go. He had burned his family bridges. That story always stays with me, and I believe as Chief Justice, you have the ability to create task force to actually attack issues that you find that exist in our system. The governor did the coalition for reentry for those who are timed out or on parole, but then there's also an opportunity for specialized dockets to serve those living their life restored through reentry, and is creating that holistic safety net.
Chief Justice Sharon Kennedy, thank you so much for your time today and for appearing here on Face the State.
I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
You too.
And again, if you would like to apply for the Rural Practice Incentive Program or just get more information on it, you can find a link in the 10tv.com featured links. We'll be right back here on Face the State. We'll turn the clock back nearly 200 years to tell you about a man who had a profound impact on Columbus in several different ways. As we celebrate Black History Month, today we're talking about a man who came to our community as a barber, but whose legacy extends far beyond his shop on High Street. Reverend Dr. James Poindexter moved to Columbus in 1838 when he was 18 years old. Although he was a barber by trade, Poindexter became a political, religious, and social leader. We spoke with historian Rita Fuller Yates about Poindexter outside of Second Baptist Church, where he served as pastor for 40 years.
James Poindexter was the first African American to serve on the city council as well as on the school board. He was significant in his role in the Underground Railroad, where he was not a conductor like a couple of the other members were who attended Second Baptist, but he was one to document the story and the journey of the Underground Railroad.
For more Black History Month stories, including community events happening all month, you can go to 10tv.com/Black History Month. That's all of our time. Thank you for joining me this week for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. I'll see you next Sunday at 11:30.